Hey everyone, and welcome to my Procreate demo for the piece I call Future Science. So when I started this piece, I had no idea what I was going to do. I just sort of wanted to do a character design from beginning to end and make it be full body. So this is sort of just getting a little insight into how I might design a character if I'm just going linearly from hey, you got to design something to, okay, here's a design. Now this goes all the way to complete, or at least something resembling complete, so this isn't the way that you would normally do it if you worked in a studio. Usually you would check sort of each one of these stages, and on top of that you would usually provide multiple options. It sort of depends on the studio, depends on the project, depends on what you're working on and who you're having to show it to, who's actually vetting the design. But that's sort of how it's normally done. This would be more of an example of just straight A to B. So I sketched a random body type. I just went skinny but muscly. And then when I did his head, I gave him like that weird shape, and now you can see that I'm tightening the line a little bit and starting to add in the design elements of what makes him him. So I'm reconciling certain things like the anatomy of his face, making that better. If you go back a little bit, you'll see that it was just really cartoonish and broken, and so it's a little better here. And now as I'm going through, I'm just sort of designing on the fly. I'm saying, okay, future-y, maybe he's got some sort of a rubbery undersuit, and then pouches. I'll make him asymmetrical, give him a big arm. You know, nothing about this design is particularly special on its own. It's more about, you know, trying to make sure the whole thing harmonizes in some special way. So if I was going to make him asymmetrical, I decided I wanted to make the other side very bare, not even throw like a watch on the other side, just keep it straight, that black rubber look. And then as you could just see right there, I had the pouches on the left leg, and then I erased them and moved them to the right because I figured, well, maybe the pouches are like gadgets that he can modify his arm with. So he's got a knee pad on his left knee so that he can kneel down, and then with his mechanical arm reached all those gadgets and modify his robo arm in some way. That was just sort of the loose concept. Again, this was a straight beginning to end, so I didn't really put a ton of thought into the design. It was more just designing on the fly. So here I'm tightening up all the lines on his face, and you can see that I reconciled like the distant corner of his mouth. I sort of gave better anatomy there to support the structure of what I wanted to do. If you go back and see the previous two iterations of the face, you can see it came a long way in those two jumps. And now I'm just sort of going in with the pencil tool and finishing things up. So in my previous video, I believe it was the one right before this, I detailed my pencil setup, which is I basically use a combination of the technical pencil that already comes in Procreate, and then I made a slightly fatter version of the technical pencil that I just call Fat Pencil. And so those two pencils would be the two main things that I'm using throughout this entire thing. So if you're wondering what I'm doing, it's all just changing the size of basically that pencil I created, which is called the Fat Pencil. So there's not a whole lot to say all the time during this video because it's a lot of noodling and just adding random gadgetry, but I wanted to make sure that the whole thing was in there for those of you that were interested in seeing every step of it in detail. So there's going to be a lot of sections where it's just basically me pounding in detail. One thing you can see right there is on his left ditch, his left elbow pit, you can see that there's like, I did that rubbery thing that like where like rubber has the ribbing, but then right there I change it because I sort of half-assed it the first time. And that's sort of the awesome part about working digitally. You can change things like that very quickly. Also, if you look throughout the entire construction of this, you might see me adjust sizes or cut something and move it, and that's sort of what allows us to iterate very quickly now because of digital. And especially since this was just me alone coming up with the design, it allowed me like on the fly to be like, oh, nope, not that, and just move it somewhere else, because the decision that I made on the fly might not have been the best decision right away, and so then I adjusted it. Which also, that's one of the key things for doing variations. Even if you're just doing a design by yourself and you feel like you're designing it exactly the way you want it right off the bat, it's always good to do a couple passes if you're designing a character for longevity, just to make sure that you don't come up with a better idea a little bit later. You'll see a lot of people who've created characters that don't become a property immediately, that you sort of see a lot of imagery of them, and then over time if that property never makes it big or goes into production, you see them redesigning that character later. And that basically stems from the fact that sometimes you produce a character, you put it out to the world because you just want people to see it, and then over time you come up with some better ideas. Right there, speaking of digital, you see me adjust the leg. His weight was distributed okay, but it wasn't quite as strong of a pose, because once a character's legs get a certain distance apart, they just sort of look like they're unsure. And so I took his distant leg and moved it a little bit straight down so it was supporting him a little bit more strongly. So all of the stuff that's like the little gadgetry on this character is just nonsense. I mean, I'm sure nobody thought that I was actually figuring out exact science behind any of this, but this is me just taking those rough shapes that I put in before and then just being like, yeah, sure, I'll embrace that shape and then just fill in the inside. So if you made me make this character be like a final character tomorrow, I would try to come up with some thing for each one of them, but they're not really designed for purpose. They're just designed for shape, except for that one. That one I pretty much just made a walkie-talkie on the back of his leg. But then there's other things like, I don't know, that weird platelet on his thigh that just the belt strap seems to kind of go through, and then there's like a pin, but who knows why. That's all just noise. So I would recommend that even though it's cool to make just cool looking stuff, if you're going to design a character that you're actually going to use in the future, that you should really think about that stuff. Also, if you're going to make a character that you're going to use in the future, say for animation or like a comic book, I wouldn't recommend doing a character with this much junk on them, because you're going to have to redraw this all the time. And but if you're designing for like a video game or something that's going to be in 3D, then it's totally fine. Here you can see I totally screw up the perspective on the tube on his back because I wasn't paying attention. I usually am doing these pieces while I'm watching TV, and so I wasn't paying attention. I had to completely correct that. And here I'm adjusting it again and again because I'm not paying attention. The top of that tube and the general look of the tube, minus the fact that there's no ball in the center, is slightly influenced by Giant Robo. If you're familiar with it, it's a great anime. It's one of my favorite things of all time. And so you see, if you go back and watch that movie, you see a lot of their design sense creeping into what I do. Highly influential on my work. So then I took the lines and I made them a light brown, switched them to multiply so that we can start getting some color into the lines. And now I'm just going in and straight flatting it. There's really nothing fancy happening here. On his face, I went ahead and put in some purple around the eyes and some red on the nose, and that's about it. In fact, I can't remember right now, but I don't think I put 5 o'clock shadow on this character because I wanted him to be, I just didn't want that to be part of his character. And so here I've decided that the glow is going to be green. In fact, if you go back into my gallery on, say, DeviantArt, and you go back like a real long time, like 9 years or something, I participated in one of those, in that Dominance War challenge way back when, and I was for Polycount, so I did a character that was like wore black leather and had green accents and had a really long face that looks different than this guy, but I would say this guy is sort of a spiritual successor to that guy. Sort of accidental, but when I was in the middle of doing this, I was like, hey, this kind of reminds me of that character, so it's kind of funny. So now I've just gone in, I flatted everything, and I'm using a purple set to multiply as my shadow layer. The idea when I originally went into this was to make it a really watercolory piece, but a full character design. But usually when you see that type of an application to a character, it's usually something a little more fantasy or a little bit more like wispy, and this was like sci-fi, so I thought it would be interesting, but then when I was in the middle of doing it, I don't know that I actually captured what I was looking for, like at all. So at this point, I've just sort of decided I'll use that same method of using like a purple shadow for everything, and I'll just use the watercolor brush and not actually work super hard at trying to make it look watercolory. So that's how this look, quote unquote, is achieved, which was basically a combination of desire to do something interesting and then totally screwing it up and just saying fuck it and continuing to produce it. So now I'm just tweaking a bunch of little things, adding more of the rim light, more of the shine to his rubber jumpsuit. trying to decide like here or there exactly what the look for this is going to be. And then I try to slow the video way down here coming up because I start really trying to add a lot of effects, and I know that part usually goes really fast in Procreate because of the way it saves things out. So here I'm just adjusting the background. I put a gradient on his body so that it would darken, and then start doing a lot of texture work and some adjustments with values, and it's really quick. There's a blur, and then I add some rips on the sides. So that's a really I do that part really fast, so I've duplicated it here for you so that you can check it out. So here it is again. Yeah, so you can see there's just a lot of little adjustments there. So that's the piece that I just call Future Science. Thanks for watching. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.